My mom thought she could just replace my dad with her creepy new boyfriend and make me call him dad, but she had no idea I was still in touch with my real father. I was 13 when mom got engaged to Brandon Lewis. My dad had been convicted of manslaughter about 5 months earlier. That night still burned in my memory. He'd been at a bar, but he wasn't even drinking. I was there with him. He went to the restroom, and a few minutes later, he came out pale and covered in blood. He shouted for someone to call the police. They came fast, but before he could explain anything, they handcuffed him and took him away. The next time I saw him was through the glass at the county jail. None of it made sense. My dad wasn't a violent man, not even close. He swore he didn't do it, and the way mom behaved after his arrest made me even more suspicious. She brought Brandon home almost instantly. The very first day, she said, "He's your new dad now. The other one's a monster." She told me my father was a killer and that I needed to stay away from him for my own safety. I didn't know what to believe, but when 5 months later, mom announced she and Brandon were getting married and that I needed to start calling him daddy, that's when I became sure dad had been framed. That's also when the nightmare really began. Brandon started getting comfortable. He'd stare at me across the dinner table, chewing slowly, his eyes roaming in ways that made my stomach turn. He'd say things like, "You're growing up so fast, turning into such a beautiful young lady." The worst part, my mom thought it was sweet. When I told her that Brandon made my skin crawl, she said I was being dramatic, but she must have told him what I said, because that same night, while she was asleep, Brandon came into my room. He grabbed my wrist so hard it left bruises and whispered, "You know what happens to naughty girls who snitch?" I was terrified. I couldn't tell mom. She wouldn't believe me, so I kept it to myself. But I started keeping another secret too. I began writing letters to dad. I'd hide them between my school books and mail them from my friend's house after class. Dad would reply through the prison email system using an account I'd secretly created. Then one Thursday, everything got worse. I came home from school to find that mom had legally changed my last name to Lewis, Brandon's last name, on all my school records. "You'll thank me when you're older," she said. That night, Brandon came into my room again, grinning like he'd won something. He sat on my bed, placed his hand on my thigh, and said I should be grateful to have a dad who cares. I shoved him away and locked myself in the bathroom until he left. I wrote to dad about what happened. His reply came days later, an actual handwritten letter this time. The paper was wrinkled, faint stains on it, like he cried while writing. My chest ached reading it. I just wanted to see him again. His birthday was coming up, so I begged mom to let me visit. "Just for a few minutes," I pleaded. "You don't have to come in, please." But she said no, and not just no. She said we couldn't because that exact weekend, Brandon had tickets to a car show and wanted us to go as a family. He even booked adjoining hotel rooms. When I said I'd rather see dad, mom screamed, "He's a killer! You're not visiting a murderer!" I shouted back, "He's innocent, and he's still my dad!" That's when Brandon slapped me across the face. Mom just stood there, silent. That weekend, they dragged me along the car show, and while I slept in the hotel room, Brandon snuck in. He was wrong. This time, he didn't stop touching my leg. I've never felt so dirty, so helpless, or so broken. The ride home was silent. I stared out the window the whole time, feeling like a ghost in my own body. Things got even worse when we returned. Mom found my hidden letters to dad. She burned them in the backyard while I watched. As punishment for betraying her, she took my bedroom door off its hinges, said it was so she could keep an eye on me. Brandon took that as an invitation. Every night, he'd stand in the doorway watching me sleep. I could feel his eyes on me even in the dark. That was my breaking point. The next day after school, I stayed late and snuck into the library. My hands were shaking as I logged onto the computer. I wrote dad an email, a long, rambling one, pouring everything out. I didn't even know what I wanted, or if it would make any difference. 2 weeks later, I got a reply. It was long, full of comforting words, but one line stood out. "Did you check where I said?" I stared at it, confused. "Check where?" I scrolled through every message we'd exchanged until I found it. In one of the older emails, dad had written, "Go to the attic behind the radiator." I remembered skimming that message the day after mom refused the prison visit, but I must have been too heartbroken to notice. So I waited until mom and Brandon went out for date night the following week. With trembling hands and a flashlight, I climbed into the attic. Behind the old radiator, wrapped in plastic, was a small leather journal. I flipped to the page dad had marked. The entry was dated just weeks before his arrest. His handwriting read, "It's been a few weeks since I caught Lauren and Brandon sneaking off to the bar together. I don't know how to confront her." My stomach dropped. Mom and Brandon? Before I could process it, I heard a car pulling into the driveway early. My heart rose. I shoved the journal under my shirt and moved toward the attic hatch just as Brandon's head appeared. His dark eyes locked on me. He climbed up, towering over me. "What are you doing up here?" he asked, voice calm but sharp. "I was looking for my old stuffed animals," I stammered. He didn't believe me. The smell of wine and cologne made my stomach turn. "You're a terrible liar," he hissed, "just like your father." Then he grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the ladder. Mom stood at the bottom, arms crossed, tapping her foot. "Why are you sneaking around?" she demanded. "She's hiding something," Brandon said, his hand tight on my wrist. I panicked. "I just wanted my teddy bear. I can't sleep without it since you took my door. Mom rolled her eyes. Go to bed. That night, I hid the journal inside my pillowcase, its corners pressing into my I didn't dare read more. The next morning, Mom acted like everything was normal, making pancakes and humming off. Brandon watched me the whole time, his eyes following every move I made. I told him I needed that, grabbed it and hid it in a plastic bag. I was at school on Monday. I went to the computer lab during lunch, pretending I had an assignment. The room was silent, except for the hum of old computer. I started photographing every page of the journal with my phone, one by one, my hands trembling the entire time. I angled my phone carefully to avoid the glare from the fluorescent lights, but my hands were still shaking, making some photos blurry. The entries in my dad's journal went back for years, his familiar handwriting growing more frantic with every page. He wrote about his suspicions of seeing Mark's car parked outside our house late at night, about Mom acting strange and distant. One entry mentioned finding a motel receipt in her purse when he'd been looking for gum. Another talked about Mark showing up at the bar during Dad's shifts, always sitting in the corner booth, watching, lurking, like a predator studying his prey. I uploaded every photo to a cloud account I'd created under a fake name, my heart pounding as the progress bar slowly filled. Then I deleted the pictures from my phone twice to make sure they were really gone. I knew Mark had been checking my phone lately. When I got home that day, he was already waiting for me, sitting on my bed like he owned it. My drawers were dumped out, clothes scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Even my jewelry box was empty. My old friendship bracelets and cheap necklaces tangled together in a pile. He looked up, eyes cold. "Where is it?" he asked in a low voice. I tried to play dumb, pretending not to understand. "Where's what?" I said, keeping my voice calm even though my stomach twisted in fear. He stood up, his face inches from mine. "Don't lie to me. I know you found something in the attic. You're not as clever as you think." He grabbed my shoulders and shook me so hard my teeth clicked. I thought he might hit me again. But just then, Mom's car pulled into the driveway. Her keys jingled as she called from downstairs. "What's going on in here?" she asked, stepping into my room and looking around at the chaos. In an instant, Mark's entire demeanor changed. He let me go and smiled that fake calm smile. "She wanted help cleaning her room," he said smoothly. "You know how messy teenagers can be." And like always, Mom believed him, or maybe she just didn't care enough to question it. That night at dinner, Mark made an announcement between bites of chicken. "We've decided to move up the wedding," he said casually. "No point in waiting until next year. Let's make this family official next month." Mom squealed like a teenager, clapping her hands together. "Oh, that's wonderful, honey." I just sat there, my appetite gone. The chicken on my plate looked gray and lifeless. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Mark started watching me constantly. He installed a camera in the hallway, pointing directly at where my bedroom door used to be. The little red light blinked at me all night, like an unblinking eye. He started driving me to school and picking me up afterward, never letting me take the bus. He'd sit in the parking lot in his truck, engine idling, his gaze following every person who talked to me. At night, he took my phone and kept it on his nightstand. "For safekeeping," he said, but I didn't stop. During school hours, I started printing out pages of Dad's journal. I hid them behind old textbooks in my locker, taping them to the metal back panel. I needed help, real help, but I didn't know who to trust. My teachers seemed oblivious. My friends were kids. They wouldn't understand. Then I remembered Uncle Hank, Dad's best friend since high school, the kind of man who always showed up when you needed him. He smelled like sawdust and carried butterscotch candies in his pocket. He'd been banned from contacting us after Dad's arrest because, according to Mom, he was a bad influence, but I knew the truth. He was the only good adult left in my world. I found his number in an old address book stuffed in our kitchen junk drawer under expired coupons and dead batteries. The next day, during PE class, I slipped out and used a phone outside school. The metal was cold against my ear. He answered on the third ring. "Hello? Uncle Hank? It's me, Lena," I whispered, my voice trembling. There was a pause, then his tone softened. "Lena? Oh my God, kiddo. Are you okay?" I started talking fast. Everything poured out. I told him Dad was innocent, that Mom was marrying the real monster, that I had proof. "Slow down," he said gently. "Take a deep breath. Meet me at the public library after school tomorrow. If your mom asks, I'll tell her I just happened to see you walking home." His steady voice made me want to cry. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe I wasn't alone. That afternoon, I told Mark I had to stay after school for a group project. He grilled me like an interrogator who was in my group, which teacher assigned it, what time I'd be home. Luckily, my history teacher confirmed the lie when he called to check, clearly annoyed by his overbearing tone. After the final bell, I ran to the library. Uncle Hank's old red pickup was waiting in the parking lot. The paint was fading, but the inside smelled like coffee and safety. He looked older than I remembered, more gray in his beard, deeper lines around his eyes. When I showed him the photos of Dad's journal on my phone, his expression darkened. I knew something was off. He muttered, "Your dad's arrest never made sense. Too fast, too neat." He asked if I still had the real journal. I nodded, telling him where I'd hidden it. He smiled tightly. "Good. We'll need more than just suspicion. We need evidence, real proof." He promised he'd reach out to some people who worked at the bar that night. "Someone must have seen something," he said. "Over the next 2 weeks, I met Uncle Hank 3 more times, always at the library, always careful. It felt like living in a spy movie. He'd managed to track down Eddie, the security guard who'd been on duty that night. Eddie was a big guy with kind eyes who remembered everything. He said he saw Mark go into the bar's bathroom just before Dad, maybe 30 seconds before, but he'd kept quiet out of fear, didn't want to get involved. Eddie admitted that guy, he had connections. Then there was Carla, the bartender. She remembered Mark too, said he'd been hanging around for weeks, always asking about my dad's schedule, pretending to be friendly. I thought it was weird, she said, but people ask stuff like that all the time. I didn't think he'd actually... She trailed off, shaking her head. And finally, Uncle Hank found Brian, the bar manager. He was in his 60s, with nicotine-stained fingers and a permanent scowl. He told Hank the police only took one set of footage from the main cameras, but there was a backup system that recorded the hallway leading to the bathrooms. Brian still had the old hard drive, gathering dust behind liquor invoices. We met at his house to watch the footage. His living room smelled like cigarettes and stale coffee. My hands shook as he connected the drive to his laptop. The timestamp appeared on the screen. 9:47 p.m. Mark enters the bathroom. He looked calm, adjusting his shirt cuffs. 9:51 p.m. Mark exits the bathroom, checking his watch before walking away. 9:52 p.m. Dad enters, clearly just needing to use the restroom after his shift. 9:53 p.m. Dad runs out covered in blood, shouting for help. It was crystal clear. Mark had 4 full minutes alone in that bathroom before my dad ever stepped inside. 4 minutes to set up a frame job. Uncle Hank copied the footage onto multiple USB drives, his hands steady but his jaw tight. "This," he said quietly, "is how we clear your father's name." Uncle Henry was methodical. He said we had to be extremely careful with how we handled this. We couldn't just walk into a police station. Brandon might have connections there, friends who owed him favors. We needed to build a rock-solid case first. He told me to act normal at home, not to let on that we knew anything. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do, but somehow Brandon sensed something. Maybe I was a bad actress, or maybe he was just paranoid. Either way, his behavior started getting darker. One night, he came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. The hallway camera couldn't see him from that angle. His voice was calm, too calm. He said he knew I'd been sneaking around with Uncle Henry, that someone had seen us together at the library, probably one of his friends who always seemed to be watching. Then he leaned closer and said if I didn't stop whatever I was doing, Mom might get hurt. He listed off his examples in a tone so casual it made my stomach twist. People fall downstairs, cars have brake problems, gas leaks happen. I understood exactly what he meant. It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. Fear settled in my chest like a block of ice, but I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe evenly. The next day, I whispered everything to Uncle Henry during our meeting, even though we were alone. He said we needed to move faster. He'd already spoken to Dad's old lawyer and shown him what we'd uncovered. The lawyer was intrigued, but careful. He told us the original journal would make our case airtight, to prove the photos weren't faked. Just the thought of retrieving it made me nauseous, but I promised I would. That night, I waited until 3 a.m., watching the red digital numbers crawl forward on my clock. When the house was silent, I crept into the bathroom barefoot, lifted the toilet tank lid, and carefully pulled out the journal wrapped in its plastic cover. It was still perfectly dry, Dad's words, still safe. I tucked it deep inside my backpack for school, zipping it into the inner pocket. But when I stepped back into the hallway, Brandon was there, standing in the dark like a ghost. He asked what I was doing up so late, his eyes gleaming. I clutched my stomach and said I felt sick. He stared at me for what felt like forever before finally stepping aside. I could feel his eyes burning into my back as I walked away. The next morning, my backpack was gone. I found it in the kitchen, unzipped, everything spread out across the table. Brandon sat there like a king at his throne, flipping through the journal with theatrical amusement. Mom was beside him, pale and confused. He told her I'd been writing fantasy stories about him, that I was disturbed and needed help. He pointed at pages saying, "Look, she's even trying to copy your husband's handwriting. See this? She's writing about you and me. This is her twisted fantasy about breaking us apart." Mom's face changed from confusion to anger as Brandon spun his lies, blending just enough truth to make them believable. She told me she was ashamed, that inventing disgusting stories about Brandon was sick, that she thought I was handling Dad's death better than this. I tried to explain that it was Dad's real journal, but she refused to hear me. She said I was forging Dad's handwriting because I couldn't accept Brandon as my stepfather, that I needed therapy, maybe even a special boarding school for troubled teens. Brandon smiled and said his cousin ran one in another state. Very strict, very remote. Good at fixing problem kids who make up lies, he added. The way he said it made my blood blood run cold. The walls felt like they were closing in. At lunch the next day, I found Uncle Henry's truck in the school parking lot and climbed in, sobbing as I told him everything. He said not to worry, we still had the footage. But when I got home that afternoon, my phone was missing from my backpack. Brandon had it. He'd gone through all my files, hacked into my cloud storage, and guessed my password within minutes. I watched helplessly as he deleted every photo of the journal, stabbing his finger into the screen with vicious delight. He told me it didn't matter. Uncle Henry's copies would be useless without the original for comparison, that any lawyer would say the photos were fake, doctored, impossible to verify. The bar footage, though, that was different. It was official. Time-stamped security footage, harder to discredit. That night, Mom told me I'd be leaving for the special boarding school on Monday. She said it was for my own good, to help me get better. No phones, no outside contact for 6 months, to eliminate negative influences. I knew exactly what that meant. Brandon wanted me gone, locked away, out of sight, out of mind. Saturday morning, while Mom was grocery shopping and Brandon was in the shower, I made my move. I could hear the water running as I quietly opened the front door and slipped out. I ran straight to Ashley's house and used her phone to call Uncle Henry. Bless her. She didn't ask questions, just help. I told him about the boarding school. He said to grab my things and meet him at the library in an hour. But when I got home to pack, Brandon was waiting on the front steps. His hair was still wet. He'd noticed I was gone. He dragged me inside by my hair, my scalp burning. Mom wasn't back yet. He threw me against the wall so hard a picture frame crashed to the floor. He snarled that I'd ruined everything, that he'd worked too hard to let a bratty kid destroy his plans. He said Dad deserved to rot in prison, that he'd been planning all of it long before that night at the bar. He laughed bitterly and said Mom had been easy to manipulate, lonely, desperate for attention while Dad worked double shifts to pay the bills. I asked him why he called that man in the restroom. I needed to hear him say it. Brandon's smile turned cruel. He said the guy was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He'd gone into the restroom to plant the bloody knife, the one with Dad's fingerprints from our kitchen, but the drunk man had walked in and started asking questions. Got too close, so Brandon had to silence him. But messy. Then, minutes later, Dad walked in trying to help. The blood was still fresh. His prints ended up on everything. Brandon slipped out, swapped the real knife for another one he brought, and left the scene before anyone noticed. He was bragging, lost in his own arrogance, and I was secretly recording everything on Ashley's phone, hidden in my pocket. I'd hit record before even walking in. Brandon didn't notice. He was too busy talking about how smart he was, how he worn gloves, how he'd studied the bar schedule for weeks. He said marrying Mom after Dad's arrest was just smart business. She had a good life insurance policy from her hospital job, and I'd be worth even more if something happened to her. Car crash, a fall, maybe just too many pills on a bad day. That's when Mom came home. She'd forgotten her wallet and returned early. She froze in the doorway, listening. Her face turned white as the groceries dropped from her hands, oranges rolling across the floor. Brandon spun around, his expression shifting into the private thing. I made him angry. I didn't mean any of it. He was trying to scare me straight, but it was like Mom had heard everything. Her world and mine shattered in that moment. He backed away, reaching behind her for the counter. Get out, she said, her voice trembling. Brandon took a step forward, trying to control her again. She grabbed a kitchen knife and raised it between them. I said get out, she repeated. He laughed, a low, mocking sound. You wouldn't dare, he said. Too much scandal, too much to lose. Shame, Brandon sneered. What would the neighbors think? But Mom didn't flinch. Her hand holding the knife was steady, steadier than I'd seen it in months. For the first time since Dad's arrest, I saw the mother I used to know, the one who chased away monsters from under my bed and kissed scraped knees until they stopped hurting. Brandon realized then that she meant it. The mask finally slipped. His expression hardened, cold and hateful. He grabbed his keys and wallet from the counter, but before leaving, he turned back toward her. This isn't over, he hissed. You think you can ruin me? I know things about you too. The little affairs you had before your husband came along. The money you borrowed from his savings to cover those shopping debts. Mom froze. Brandon smiled, slow, cruel. Go to the cops and I'll destroy you. Everyone will know who you really are. Then he slammed the door so hard the windows rattled and a few picture frames crashed to the floor. Mom collapsed right there in the kitchen, sobbing, her body trembling uncontrollably. I dropped down beside her and pulled out Ashley's phone. My hands were shaking as I played Brandon's recorded confession. She listened, every horrible word, and her face just crumbled. Tears streamed down as she whispered, I'm so sorry. I was so stupid. I failed you. I failed your dad. I told her it wasn't too late, that we needed to call the police now. But she was terrified of Brandon's threats, of losing everything, of what people might say. I called Uncle Henry myself. He was at our house in less than 15 minutes, carrying a USB drive with a bar footage. We sat Mom down at the kitchen table and showed her everything. The screenshots, the journal pages I'd backed up, the notarized witness statements Henry had collected. When she saw it all laid out, the evidence, the timeline, she ran to the sink and threw up. She realized she'd been sharing a bed with her husband's killer, planning a future with him. That was the moment she finally agreed agreed to call the police. 2 detectives arrived an hour later. They were calm but compassionate, offering Mom tissues, speaking gently to me. They listened to Brandon's confession multiple times, watched the bar footage frame by frame, and took Dad's journal as evidence. One detective said quietly that they'd always had doubts about Dad's conviction. The forensics never quite matched, but the department had been under pressure to close the case quickly. Brandon's confession tied up every loose end. That night, an arrest warrant went out for Brandon, but he was gone. His apartment was cleaned out, his car missing, every trace of him erased. The police told us not to panic. They'd find him. They stationed a patrol car outside our house, just in case. Mom and I didn't sleep. We pushed the couch against the front door, left every light on, and sat together in silence, jumping at every sound from outside. The next morning, Uncle Henry called with a lead. One of his buddies in construction had spotted Brandon at a cheap roadside motel 2 towns over, trying to pay cash for a room. The police were already on their way. By noon, they had him. Brandon tried to run but didn't get far. When they searched his car, they found something chilling, a small lockbox in the trunk. Inside was the real murder weapon. The knife from the bar had been a decoy, but this one still had traces of the victim's blood lodged deep in the handle. At first, Brandon denied everything. He claimed I'd fabricated the recording using AI, said Mom was lying to protect me because she felt guilty. But the evidence was undeniable. The bar footage showed him entering the restroom seconds before the attack. His fingerprints were on the real knife once forensics retested it. The wound patterns fit his height and dominant hand, not Dad's. Cornered, Brandon finally broke. He confessed in exchange for a plea deal, spilling everything: how he framed Dad, manipulated Mom, and staged the murder. Then came the bombshell. Brandon wasn't just a killer. He was a predator, a man who'd done this before in other towns, leaving ruined families and false arrests behind him. The detectives called him a serial manipulator, a man who thrived on power, using charm to slip through cracks in the system. Dad's lawyer filed an emergency appeal that very night. Within 48 hours, a judge reviewed the new evidence and signed an order for Dad's immediate release. After 8 long months in prison for a crime he didn't commit, my father was finally coming home. Mom and I drove to pick him up the next morning. The highway felt endless. The radio played softly, old country songs that made Mom cry harder. Neither of us spoke. When the prison gates opened and Dad stepped out, I barely recognized him. He looked thinner, older, his hair now more gray than brown. But when his eyes met mine, they lit up just like they used to. I ran to him and hugged him tighter than I'd ever hugged anyone. He smelled like bleach and sadness, but he was still my dad. He held me close, crying into my hair. "I missed you so much," he whispered. "I knew you'd find the truth." Mom stood back, tears streaming, unsure whether she should approach. Dad looked at her for a long, heavy moment. Then he simply said, "We'll talk later. Right now, I just want to go home." The ride back was quiet. Dad asked small, ordinary questions about school, my friends, my favorite diner, trying to fill the silence with something normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. When we pulled into the driveway, Dad stood on the porch for a full minute, just staring at the house. It looked different now. All of Brandon's things were gone, leaving empty spots on shelves and blank hooks on walls. Dad walked from room to room, touching furniture, picking up old family photos Mom hadn't replaced yet. That first night was painfully awkward. Dad chose to sleep on the couch, even though Mom offered him their old bedroom. I woke up at 3 a.m. and heard him moving around the kitchen, unable to rest after months in a cell. When I walked in, he was making coffee with trembling hands. We sat together at the table in silence until he finally asked softly, "Are you really okay?" I told him everything, every horrible thing Brandon had done. He didn't interrupt, just clenched his jaw tighter with each word. When I finished, he took a deep breath and said quietly, "I'm sorry, kiddo. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." I told him it wasn't his fault. The next few days blurred together, a whirlwind of lawyers, paperwork, and meetings. Dad's attorney was working to get his record fully cleared, not just overturned. There was even talk of compensation for wrongful imprisonment, but Dad didn't care about money. All he wanted was his life back. Mom tried following him around the house, attempting to talk, but Dad wasn't ready. He'd answer in one-word sentences, quickly leaving the room. Brandon's trial was scheduled 6 months out. The prosecutor said that with Brandon's confession and all of our evidence, he'd likely get life without parole. They had tied him to 3 other murders in different states, all following the same twisted pattern. He'd frame someone close to the victim, then swoop in as the grieving family's friend. The detective told us we were lucky his other victims hadn't survived. If they had, they might have exposed him sooner. I went back to school, but nothing felt normal. Kids whispered as I passed. Everyone seemed to know about Brandon and Dad by now. Ashley stayed by my side, along with a few other friends who actually mattered. mattered. Teachers were unusually kind, which almost made it worse. I didn't want pity. I just wanted life to be normal, but normal felt gone forever. Dad started working construction with Uncle Henry. Manual labor helped clear his head, he said. He'd come home exhausted, dust coating his clothes, but calmer. He also started seeing a therapist who specialized in wrongful conviction trauma. He didn't talk about the sessions, but I could see they were helping. He stopped flinching when doors slammed, stopped checking locks obsessively. Mom moved out after 2 weeks, renting a small apartment across town. She said she needed space to figure herself out. Honestly, I was relieved. The tension whenever she and Dad were in the same room was suffocating. She'd betrayed him in the worst way, even if Brandon had manipulated her. Some things can't be undone. She occasionally asked if I wanted to stay with her, but I said no. I needed to be with Dad. A month later, the divorce papers arrived. Dad signed without reading them, just wanted it over. Mom gave him everything. The house, the car, full custody of me. Her guilt consumed her. She started seeing a therapist too, trying to understand how she'd been so blind. Sometimes I felt bad for her. Then I remembered how she'd chosen Brandon over Dad and refused to believe me. The sympathy vanished. Uncle Henry became a regular at our house again. He'd bring his kids over on weekends and we'd have cookouts like the old days. His twins, Elijah and John, were only 8 but adored Dad. They didn't care about his past. They just loved that he could throw a football and tell funny stories. His daughter Deborah, my age, got close to me fast. She understood what it was like to have your world turned upside down. Her mom had left when she was 10. 3 months after Dad got out, I had to testify at a pretrial hearing. The prosecutor said my testimony would prevent Brandon from claiming insanity or coercion. I wore my nicest dress, the blue one Dad had bought me for my birthday 2 years ago. My hands shook as I swore to tell the truth. Brandon sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller than I remembered. He tried to catch my eye, but I stared straight ahead. I told them everything. The threats, the unwanted touching, the night at the hotel. The judge had to call a recess when I started crying over finding Dad's journal. Dad couldn't be in the courtroom yet, but Uncle Henry sat in the gallery, giving me a reassuring thumbs up. Brandon's lawyer tried to make me look like a confused kid who misunderstood his intentions. I stayed calm, recounting every detail exactly as it happened. The prosecutor played the recording from Ashley's phone, and Brandon's face went pale. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, 25 years to life instead of life without parole. The prosecutor flatly refused. After the hearing, reporters swarmed us outside the courthouse. Dad shielded me as we pushed to Uncle Henry's truck. They shouted questions about forgiveness, moving on, seeing Brandon in chains. We didn't answer. Nothing they could ask would make them understand. This wasn't entertainment. It was our life. Mom began sending long, rambling letters apologizing for failing as a mother, for not seeing the signs. I read a few, then started tossing them unopened. Dad said maybe I should consider forgiving her eventually, for my own peace, not hers. I wasn't ready. Maybe I'd never be ready. She had chosen a monster over her own family. Some things can't be forgiven. Brandon's actual trial was brutal. The prosecutor brought in families of his other victims, demonstrating a clear pattern of manipulation and violence. One woman from Arizona testified about how Brandon dated her after her husband's suspicious death. She'd sensed danger and ended it, probably saving her life. Another family from Nevada spoke about their son, wrongly imprisoned for a murder eerily similar to Dad's case. The prosecutor announced they were reopening that case too. Dad testified on the 3rd day. He wore his only suit, the one from his wedding, which he had kept for some reason. He recounted finding the body, trying to help, and the confusion during his arrest. He described prison, missing my birthdays, and letters I'd never received. His voice broke when he spoke about the day I was born and how he had promised to protect me, feeling like he'd failed. Brandon took the stand on day 5 against his lawyer's advice. He tried to paint himself as a victim, claiming the man in the bathroom had attacked him first, but under cross-examination, his story unraveled. He contradicted himself, lost his temper, and revealed his true nature to the jury. When asked about his plans for me and Mom, he refused to answer. His own lawyer looked defeated. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and returned guilty on all counts: murder, conspiracy, fraud, attempted assault on a minor, and more. The judge sentenced him to life without parole, consecutive for each crime. Brandon didn't react. He just stared at the table. As they led him out, he looked at me one last time. I stared back, letting him see that he hadn't broken me. I had won. Dad and I went to his favorite Mexican diner, where the owner hugged him and said the meal was on the house. We ate in quiet, comfortable silence, exhausted but relieved. believed. It was finally over. Brandon would die in prison, and we could start rebuilding. Mom tried to visit the house the next week. Dad refused, speaking to her through the screen door. She begged for another apology, for family counseling. Dad said no. That chapter was closed. She had made her choice. Now she had to live with it. I started seeing a therapist too, Dr. Cheryl, who specialized in trauma. She helped me process everything, teaching me it wasn't my fault, and that I had been incredibly brave. Some days I believed her, some days I didn't. But slowly the nightmares stopped. I stopped checking locks obsessively, stopped flinching when men walked behind me. Progress came in small steps. Dad and I built new routines. Sunday breakfast at the diner, Wednesday movie nights, helping Uncle Henry with projects on Saturday. We talked more than ever about school, friends, the future. He helped me with homework, even though math wasn't his strong suit. He cheered louder than anyone at my mediocre clarinet performances. We were learning how to be a family again, just the two of us. 6 months after the trial, Dad met someone new. Caroline, the bartender who had testified. First, she came as a friend, then something more. She made Dad laugh. Real laughter, not the forced smiles from before. I liked her. She didn't try to replace Mom. She treated me like a person, not a project. She'd bring takeout, and we'd watch terrible movies together, making fun of the plots. Life was slowly, cautiously, finding its rhythm again. Dad smiled more when Caroline was around. Mom eventually stopped trying to contact us. I heard from Ashley's mom that she'd moved to another state, starting fresh where nobody knew her story. Part of me hoped she'd find peace. Part of me didn't care. She'd been so easily fooled, so quick to replace Dad. Maybe Brandon had seen that weakness in her from the start. Maybe that's why he picked our family to destroy. A year after everything, Dad received a settlement from the state for wrongful imprisonment. Not millions, but enough to pay off the house and put some money away for my college. He bought a new truck, took a vacation to the mountains, and finally started living again. He kept working construction, though, saying he liked the honesty of it. You either built something right or you didn't. No room for lies or manipulation. I turned 15 that spring. Dad threw me a big party, probably overcompensating for all the birthdays he'd missed. Uncle Henry's family came. Caroline was there. Even a few kids from school showed up. We had a bounce house, which was ridiculous for teenagers, but nobody complained. Dad grilled burgers and told embarrassing stories about when I was little. For a few hours, we felt like a normal family having a normal party. That night, after everyone left, Dad and I cleaned up the yard in comfortable silence. He thanked me for believing in him, for never giving up. I told him I'd always known he was innocent, that he wasn't capable of hurting anyone. He hugged me tight and said I'd saved his life. We both cried a little. The good kind of tears, the healing kind. Life went on. I made honor roll and started dating a nice guy named Rory from my chemistry class. Dad threatened to clean his shotgun whenever Rory came over, but he was mostly joking. Caroline moved in a year later, bringing her cat, Mr. Whiskers, who immediately claimed Dad's chair. We became a weird little family, built on shared trauma but held together by choice and love. Brandon died in prison 2 years later. Heart attack, the letter said. He was 43. I felt nothing. I just closed the letter and went back to my homework. Dad asked if I was okay, and I said, yeah, I really was. Brandon had been dead to me the day they sentenced him. His actual death was just paperwork, nothing more. Mom sent a card for my 18th birthday, just signed Love, Mom, with no return address. I kept it, tucked in my desk drawer with other things I couldn't quite throw away. Dad said maybe someday I'd want to find her, to make peace. Maybe he was right, or maybe some bridges are meant to stay burned. Time would tell. I got into college on a full scholarship, planning to study criminal justice, maybe become a lawyer, help other families torn apart by lies. Dad cried at graduation, embarrassing me in front of everyone. Caroline took a million pictures while Uncle Henry's family cheered from the bleachers. My chosen family, the ones who stood by me when everything fell apart. The night before I left for college, Dad and I sat on the porch swing watching fireflies. He told me he was proud of me, that I'd become an amazing young woman despite everything. I told him I loved him, that he was the best dad anyone could ask for. We sat in comfortable silence. No need for more words. We had survived the worst imaginable and come out stronger. That was enough. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found Dad's journal that night. If Brandon had succeeded in sending me away, if Mom had married him, if Dad had died in prison, believing nobody cared. But I did find it. I did fight back. And sometimes that's all you can do. Fight for the truth and hope someone listens. In our case, finally, someone did. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found Dad's journal that night. If Brandon had succeeded in sending me away. If Mom had married him. If Dad had died in prison, believing nobody cared. But I did find it. I did fight back. And sometimes that's all you can do. Fight for the truth and hope someone listens. In our case, finally, someone did. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment which country you're watching